Hi, Jim Romer from Weather Wealth. This week we're going to be talking about commodity spreads, how to use spreads, particularly in the grain markets right now, with a very wet spring for Midwestern corn planting, but the drought easing for Kansas, Oklahoma, and Nebraska wheat. One reason why wheat prices sold off late last week. We told the Weather Wealth clients about this well in advance. First of all, there are two different types of spread trades. One's called the calendar spread, which you, for example, buy July soybeans, sell November soybeans, the same contract, right? Intra-commodity spreads, related commodities, but opposite positions. For example, buying December corn and selling July wheat. These don't work all the time. So you have to pay attention to seasonality and also the weather. But the pros of spreading, and there are many of them, it provides additional opportunities to make money potentially. You don't have to really call the market direction and timing exactly. You can hedge risk by trading two different commodities. Also, some commodities, with all this volatility because of the Ukraine-Russian war and inflation, $5,000 to $10,000 per contract margins, but by spreading that lowers the margin. If you buy corn against wheat, instead of paying $10,000 a contract, you can offset that risk. It's a third of that. And also, there's just a variety of other opportunities, and you can read about this in my report today for a Weather Wealth subscriber. Some of the cons of trading spreads is you don't necessarily make as much money, but again, the risks are reduced so much that it really makes sense in this environment, given the war and inflation, to do these kind of things. Let's talk about grain spreads today. Of course, there's spreads like gold against silver and euro dollars against the Japanese yen, whatever. But in this weather market we're having now this spring, Kansas City wheat was outperforming Chicago wheat. That's a very popular spread, but that trend is reversing as the drought eases in the plains and we have corn belt planting delays. So corn is beginning to outperform both wheat and also some other markets. Soybean meal versus soybean oil is a very popular historical spread. We don't really recommend that right now. That tends to be a very important spread during the harvest season in both South America and also the United States. And one of the most popular spreads, two different commodities, is corn versus wheat. Very popular ahead of the grain harvest. For example, the big harvest when it comes on for wheat during June and July tends to pressure wheat. If you have a drought during that time, it tends to rally corn. The opposite happens in the fall with harvest pressure for corn. If there's any problems planting wheat in the fall, then wheat can outperform corn. So it's very important to actually watch seasonality. Here's an example a few years ago of a spread selling wheat and buying corn that may be working again here too this May. Look how corn rallied from $4 to $5.25 a couple of years ago in the spring, and wheat sold off. So selling wheat and buying corn, you actually make the profit potential between both about $9,000 a contract. Not bad. So here's what's going on right now. We have a very wet Midwestern spring. I've been talking about this to my Weather Wealth clients for the last few weeks. You can see how the March 31st planting intention report, that first arrow there on the bottom, really showed a big increase in soybean acres, less corn acres, and we saw an explosion in corn versus beans the last few weeks. Now, in the last 5 to 10 days, we got above the trend line, that arrow on top. For example, being long 2 December corn, short 1 November soybean has yielded some profits. Why? Well, when you have planting delays during a wet spring, that could mean that corn is planted later and could actually reduce yields. Beans can be planted till mid-June. Corn, the optimal time there you see is usually in early to mid-May, okay? So if we have a really wet spring and cool, wet conditions like we've been forecasting, look how the trend line of corn yields after about May 12th to the 20th really declined sharply. So what that means is corn can outperform soybeans going into the month of May into early June because beans have more time to be planted. So what does that mean? Farmers tend to plant more beans, they have more time to plant and plant less corn. You combine that with the bullish USDA crop report before all these weather problems the last few weeks. You see how corn spiked against soybeans back in late March. You combine this wet weather and that bullish report, and you have the potential to see corn to outperform soybeans. Here's another spread that's actually worked. We were bullish wheat in Kansas City wheat in the last few weeks because of the drought in the plains and bearish corn, but now that spread is actually reversing. Actually, this particular chart is showing Kansas City wheat versus Chicago wheat. Chicago wheat, soft red wheat grown in Europe to feed animals, and also Illinois, Indiana, and the Delta and Ohio. That has not been affected as much as the drought in the plains, which has affected Kansas City wheat. Notice how wheat prices for Kansas City soared here until recently and then collapsed late last week. In other words, Kansas City wheat is beginning to sell off versus Chicago wheat as a drought eases in the plains. A lot to talk about, of course. Here are the most popular spreads over the last 20 to 30 years for the month of May. For example, look at this. 15 years in a row, third line down, gasoline in May outperformed crude oil. How about that? Go down a little bit further. Look how typically 15 years in a row, November soybeans outperformed August. Now, that may not happen this year if we have planting delays that are severe enough to cause more increase in bean acres and less corn acres here over the next few weeks. So for Weather Wealth subscribers, I'll give you all these trade recommendations. You can look at all these spreads on my blog today. Again, a very exciting time, many commodities. Weather's going to be a big crucial factor here in the weeks and months to come. The spreads in natural gas we'll be looking at, spreads in cotton and coffee and things using options, things like that. Right now, the big news here for the month of May is going to be in the grain market. Enjoy.